Without a doubt, tomato plants, in all their forms, are the most popular crop grown in the garden. There's many reasons for this, but one of the main ones revolves around just how easy they are to plant and grow. As a vigorous nightshade that's virtually immune to transplant shock, tomatoes are sold every spring by every store under the sun as pre-started younglings. Racks and racks of them enticing new growers to join in on the fun. Likely, this is you deciding to finally take the plunge and try your hand at some gardening. Or maybe you just want to hone your tomato growing skills to make this your best season yet. Either way, we're going to cover it all today, and by the end, you're going to know everything there is to know about planting tomatoes. For those of you just joining the game now, let me tell you, you've skipped an entire world of growing to get to this point. From tiny alien-looking seeds to young starter plants that tower above all others. It's no small feat to get to this point if you're doing yours from scratch. If you're simply buying your tomato starts every year, you can skip ahead about 2 minutes. But for those of you that are interested in seeing this process from beginning to end, let's rewind and let me take you back to the cold dead of winter. The holidays are now behind us. With nothing growing in the garden and many of us dreaming of greener days, the beginning of a new year means one thing: seed starting. Pepper, eggplant, cucumber, zucchini, and of course, our tomatoes. Yes, it's much easier to buy our tomato starts in the spring, but the supply is limited to just a few varieties, and the costs can be significantly higher if we're doing more than just a few plants. So we just make our own. Starting 8 to 10 weeks before our last spring frost date, which you're going to have to look up for your particular zone, your particular climate, we plant our seeds into specialized seeding soil. At room temperatures or slightly higher, the seeds germinate in about a week. From here, it's all about light, water, and nutrient management. Really though, the first couple of weeks are uneventful. Nothing happens until the plants get their first true leaves. However, once that familiar tomato foliage pops out of the center of the seed leaves, well, the race is on. And race they do. The struggles can be real for indoor tomato growing without enough light and airflow, as the plants run the risk of becoming large and leggy. For those showing superior growth, another benefit of starting our own, about 2 weeks before we want to get them out into the garden, we have to start thinking about hardening them off. About 10 to 14 days before our planting date, which we'll get to in a bit here, we need to start conditioning our tomato plants to get them ready for life on the outside. Hardening off is universally common with all of our indoor seedlings that are designed to go outside. It's simply just the gradual acclimation of lush indoor plants to the infinitely greater environmental pressures of the outside life. It takes about 2 weeks to fully harden off a tomato plant, and really, this is a process that cannot be skipped. Which brings us to right now. Whether you've skipped ahead and simply bought your own at the store, or you made a bunch from scratch like I did here, we're all at the same stage. We're here for the same purpose, to finally plant our tomatoes. Okay, you're scouting out your yard, looking for the best spot to plant your tomatoes, or to place your containers if you're going to go that route. First things first, we need to satisfy a tomato plant's number one need, and that's making sure that they get enough sunlight. Full, direct sun, as much as you can give them. Look, don't pick a shady spot in your yard, they just won't do well. 6 hours of direct full sunlight is the minimum, more if you can give it. As far as wind, it doesn't seem to affect the adult plants very much, so exposure really isn't a concern. But do ensure that the area drains well and is free of standing water. Tomatoes soak up a lot of water, and they always seem thirsty. But standing water in your veggie crops, even these tomatoes here, is a definite no-no. Wet, soggy plants are going to suffer at best, and they'll rot and die at worst. So, full sun, good drainage, pretty easy stuff so far. Before we get to the soil type and actual planting, there's one more parameter that we do need to talk about, and that's timing. Again, if you're buying your tomatoes as pre-started seedlings, this really doesn't concern you because those plants come available right at the time they should be planted anyways. Normally, freak storms do occur, and make no mistake, they can kill all of your tomato plants in a single night. Remember, for as tough as they are and as fast as they grow, tomatoes are 100% tropical, warm climate plants. So, once your last spring frost date has passed, growers normally wait another 2 weeks and then plant their tomatoes out in the garden. That's fine, and it is a good guideline, but I still find it to be kind of arbitrary. So, for me, I like to wait until the nighttime lows consistently stay above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomatoes catch up fast at every stage, and technically they're still growing in their pots. So a few extra days or even weeks just to make sure that the weather is warm enough is just smart business. Okay, it's all pretty straightforward so far. We now know when to plant, where to plant, and what the tomatoes need from us to grow their best. The only lingering question is, what about that soil? Well, as you'd expect, tomatoes are quite forgiving here, and as long as it's not straight up sand or clay, they'll thrive. The best soils for them, however, are going to be rich in minerals, nutrients, as well as organic matter. It's going to be very adept at holding moisture, but it's going to shed water and drain freely. As well, it's going to be slightly acidic to a neutral pH. In other words, pretty much the same soil that we use for all of our garden veggies. Important, yes, but nothing out of the ordinary. So, if you're going to be growing your tomatoes in containers, a light, airy, organic potting mix works the best. And if you're growing them out in the garden or in raised beds, make sure to amend with some nice compost to keep those plants happy. Speaking of happy, these plants would love nothing more than to get out of these tiny pots and out into the garden. So let's go ahead and plant a few dozen, talking about the process along the way. Planting your tomatoes is a little bit different than other plants, even other vegetables, like this zucchini here. Normally, when you're replanting an existing plant, you observe its current root color. That's the location on the stem where it meets the soil. That's how deep you replant it? Easy peasy. Well, not so with these guys. The number one rule for planting your tomatoes is to plant them deep. Normally, several nodes worth of lower leaves are removed, revealing half or even more of exposed stem. The top 2 to 3 sets of leaves are left intact, and the plant is buried within a couple of inches of that bottom row. This is normal planting for your indeterminate or vine type tomatoes. Now, if you're growing in a more shallow type bed, or you don't want to dig that deep of a hole, there is one other trick that we can do to plant these guys deep. Take all the leaves off like we did before, and then lay the plant on its side. This works great for those overgrown seedlings that already have a natural curvature to their stems. Different technique, same result. Another good thing about using this method is that you can do it in containers as well. Again, lay the plant on its side, bury that stem, leaving only the top 2 to 3 layers of leaves exposed. Brilliant stuff. For your bush types like this Tiny Tim here, it's much the same thing, just not nearly as drastic. I'll still remove 1 or 2 sets of those lower leaves, but that's it. Remember, determinate tomato plants grow to a predetermined height, so pruning and burying too much can actually limit future production. Either way, all tomatoes get planted deep, even the bush types. But why is this? What's the advantage? Well, some plants have a life strategy where they send out vigorous stem roots whenever that plant's stem comes in contact with moist soil. These appendages, known as adventitious roots, can double or even triple the root network capacity of a plant in a very short period of time. And it just so happens that tomatoes are the absolute king of doing this. By setting up and establishing their root systems this fast, the tomato plants can avoid any setbacks, any transplant shock, and get going right away. Bigger roots means bigger plants, and bigger plants is going to mean bigger harvests for you. Take advantage of adventitious roots because it's a big missed opportunity if you don't. Tomatoes are large, vigorous plants. And it may not look like it right now, but even these 10-gallon pots are eventually going to put limitations on these two Romas here. So, if you're going to be going the container route, I'd say that 7 gallons is the absolute minimum size that you need. Even for the dwarf determinate types, this is barely enough volume. Bed and garden growers aren't free from the spacing rules either. 18 to 24 inches between each plant is the minimum amount required. Tomatoes will eventually have a huge canopy of foliage, not to mention the root system that we just talked about. Don't make the plants compete for water and nutrients, as they're going to suffer, and then so will your harvests. Now, I should mention, if you live in a warm climate, say zone 10 or higher, you can also direct seed your tomato plants. Once your soil has reached that 50 Fahrenheit, 10 Celsius threshold, sow your tiny tomato seeds about half an inch deep in moist potting mix, observing all the spacing, location, exposure, and drainage rules that we talked about earlier. They'll sprout in about 2 weeks, faster if it's warmer, and you'll be on your way. If your summer is at least 90 days long, for sure direct seeding is a viable option. In my opinion though, transplanting is the superior method. Okay, let's go ahead and finish off this bed, getting the rest of the Romas in the ground. I'm going slightly tighter on the spacing here because I really want at least 6 plants per bed. At least 2 feet between each plant is better than the 18 inches I'm doing here. Hopefully, I'm not going to regret this decision later. Okay, all planted. Normally, we'd be transplanting our veggies on a cool overcast day. These are tomatoes though, so I'm not too worried. However, they do need to be watered ASAP. Before that can happen though, they have to be mulched. And I get questions on this all the time. Why is mulching so important to me? Why am I so diligent about it? Well, rather than going through all the virtues of mulching yet again, let's see what happens when I water without mulching first. Yikes. Right away you can see the top level destruction and erosion on a pretty significant scale. A perfectly planted hilled tomato plant gone to waste. And this is just a fine watering can over a few seconds at close range. If I had planted this guy any shallower, look out. It would have completely toppled over 90 degrees. So, it's never a question, always mulch first. Nice and thick, cover that entire area all around the base of the plants. After the plants are all mulched, we can now finally water. Now, don't skimp on this part because proper watering is the single biggest key to successful tomato growing. For some reason, many new growers simply love to water every day. They think that tomatoes are always thirsty, 100% of the time, and that watering every day is doing them good. I can tell you right now, it's not. Frequent, shallow waterings for your tomatoes are going to train their roots to stay near the surface. This gives your tomatoes little to no resilience for the upcoming summer heat. And you'll get things like stunted plants, tomato leaf curl, and even blossom end rot. We have to water deep and thoroughly, but at less frequent intervals. Force those root networks to go downwards looking for the moisture, and you'll create stronger, healthier plants in the process. Okay, we made it this far, but what about feeding? Well, the general consensus is tomato plants are actually first fed right at the time of planting. Because they're so vigorous and quick to get established, and rarely in any danger of transplant shock, most people feed tomatoes the same day they plant them. Now, if your beds or your containers are heavily amended with nice rich compost, you won't have to feed right away. For me, I wait about 3 days after the initial planting to give my tomatoes their first feeding. I just find that letting those plants get better established, letting those roots expand a little more, it's going to be a better use of that fertilizer. Having my plants settle in for that extra 72 hours makes a big difference. Now, if you're wondering what to feed with, start off with just a balanced liquid organic fertilizer. Things like fish emulsion or seaweed extract work beautifully. And by going with the liquid stuff, you can treat the fertilizer application as a simple watering. Quite soon after planting, we're going to have to start thinking about staking or trellising our tomato plants, especially the vine indeterminate ones. But don't forget about those bush types either. Tomato fruit is very heavy. Now, there's many ways to accomplish this, either with wood stakes banged into the ground or elaborate wire systems. Whichever you choose, always make sure to secure your tomato plant right above the leaf nodes. We have to do this to eliminate the chance of breakage. I've seen it too many times to count. This is where you have to secure them. Okay, that's it. Your tomato plants are finally planted and set up for success. Looking back though, that was a ton of info. Let's recap it all to make sure that it makes sense. No other plant garners as much anticipation every spring as our tomatoes do. Hundreds of shapes, sizes, and varieties, you'll never get bored of growing these guys. Normally cultivated as pre-started seedlings, tomatoes go into the ground outside once your nighttime lows consistently stay above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Pick a super sunny location that drains well and is free of any standing water. If you're growing in containers, 7 gallons is the minimum size. And if you're growing in beds or in the ground, space your plants 2 feet apart. Now, unlike most of our other vegetables, tomatoes are planted deep. So deep in fact that we actually remove 2 or 3 or even more of the bottom leaf nodes so that we can expose that stem and plant them even deeper. As the king of adventitious stem roots, tomatoes are going to create a root network all along that stem, all up and down the soil profile, propelling them to gardening greatness. After planting, mulch well and water even better. Really thorough. Train those roots to go downwards to make the plants more resilient to drought. Expect to start seeing fruit around 8 to 10 weeks after planting, depending on the variety, the climate, and how far along your transplants were initially. The harvest on tomato plants is like no other vegetable in your garden, but we'll save that for another video. Growing your own tomatoes is on everyone's bucket list, especially if you're growing them in actual buckets. Jokes aside, they are quite easy to grow, and if you follow the rules of timing, spacing, watering, and support, you're pretty much guaranteed to be successful with them. I wish you all the success with your tomatoes and any of the other veggies you really want to grow this year. For me though, I'm just getting started, so happy growing, and I'll see you soon. Hey, thanks so much for watching, guys. I appreciate the support more than you know. And if you're getting value from these videos, please like and share them to spread the word and help your fellow gardener to grow better.